Welcome to On the Bauble Podcast, episode 40. I'm your host, Tsubasa J. Ueda, and with me is my co-host, Yuki Lee Bender. Today, we're going to be doing a deep dive into how to draft Chane for the Monarch draft. I guess that's it, right? We're only talking about Chane today.
Yeah, talk about Chane. Before that, we'll talk about our week. But yeah, we're just going to be doing our Chane episode, all about how to, what are some of the key cards, what are some of the archetypes, how to play him, how to get into the deck, all those kinds of things. So we'll be going deep on Chane this week, and then the other classes or heroes will be coming up next week.
Awesome. Okay, then, so how was your week, Yuki?
My week's been pretty good. Played some Monarch draft on the weekend, did 2 drafts on Sunday and a draft on Monday as well. Played a whole bunch of stuff. Drafted a Leviathan deck, a Chane deck, a Prism deck. So I've been getting some good practice in. It feels good to kind of get reps in the format. We kind of mentioned last week that we've drafted this format a number of times, but as I was drafting it, I kind of realized it's been a while since I drafted it, so definitely feel like I'm getting some of the rust off and things are coming back to me. But it's been fun. I've been really enjoying kind of diving back into Monarch draft.
Didn't you say you were going to draft Bolton or force Bolton this week?
Yeah, that didn't happen. I think I was thinking about it, and then I realized that the problem was that I don't know what Bolton should look like. So I think what I'm going to have to do is try to build some 30 card Bolton decks with commons and rares, maybe 2 of each common and 1 rare, 1 of each rare kind of thing, and see what that looks like, just so I have an idea of what it is that I'm looking for. Because I feel like right now I'm just I don't even know what a good Bolton deck looks like, so it's hard to know. I'm not exactly sure what to prioritize. I know Take Flight is good. I know Courageous Steel Hand's pretty good. I know Valiant Thrust is good and V and stuff, but I'm not exactly sure about the combination of cards and everything.
That's fair. Well, I know what a good Bolton deck looks like now. This week on our first Monarch draft, one of the guys went 3-0 with Bolton with the most broken Bolton deck I've seen so far. He had Valiant Dynamo, V of the Vanguard, Spill Blood.
Yeah, he was the only Bolton in the pod too, so he had a bunch of Take Flights and just good cards. I played him twice with my pretty mediocre Leviathan deck that was playing brandishes in it. The brandishes were actually pretty good, but anyways, I played my pretty mediocre Leviathan deck and I just died on turn 3 both games.
That's so crazy.
Yeah, it's just he's just yeah, I'm gonna go first and charge my soul, and I'm okay, cool. Hit you for some damage. On his next turn, he's hitting me for 17 or something, not even counting the plus attack from the Bolton stuff. I'm just oh, cool. Guess I die.
Yeah, I guess we just go straight into the episode then?
Yeah, we can do that. I think we got lots to talk about.
Yeah, that sounds good. Do you want to go over a key gameplay thing? We talked about this on the Monarch overview episode, but let's just go over that to make sure everyone's on the same page.
So kind of to summarize, Chane is definitely the kind of hero where you need to have a plan on how you're going to win the game and what that's going to look like. Because of the soul shackles, you usually get kind of about 5 turns, assuming you're shackling every turn, after which point you're pretty much out of deck, and unless you have them at 1 with an arcane damage left in your deck or something, you're no longer going to win that game. So you need to have a very clear plan of what that looks like, and we kind of talked about the 2 major archetypes. We'll be going into each of those in more detail, but there's a more aggressive archetype that can just kind of run its opponents over, and there's also a more combo pitch stack oriented build that can sort of do 20 plus damage on the last turn fairly reliably. That being said, it does take some amount of practice. Sequencing is important with the deck, and it's a deck that hopefully after this episode you'll feel comfortable trying out, but I would very much recommend drafting it a couple times before you play something like your Nationals if you are playing that and trying to draft it, because having a few reps on the deck and having seen how things play out a few times, I think will just really help you kind of pick up the deck. It's hard to do it on the fly and make it all work perfectly the first time, I guess, at least for me.
Yeah, no, definitely it's a very difficult deck to do that. It's going to be quite difficult if you're going to try playing the combo version. You'll need to know your pitch stack and how the shackles affect your pitch stack. It's pretty easy once you like get a hang of it, but it'll be near impossible to do that like if it's your first time picking up the deck and drafting it. So definitely if you can't do drafts, at least just build like a 30 card draft chaff chain deck and see what these decks end up looking like. And trying that would probably like it would help a lot in being able to pilot the deck properly.
Yeah, and if you do that, I think you can. If you do that, or if you draft Chane and you have your deck left over, I think it's even the kind of deck you could consider goldfishing a few times, just to like with intentionally thinking through your pitch and what that looks like, and seeing if you can just like remember what's in your pitch deck, remember like think about setting up those end game turns to close out the game and all of that. I think if you just have the repetitions, it's going to be a lot easier to do that when there's, stakes and pressure and, you're in a match that really matters. This is another way you could go about practicing it.
Yeah. Let's just move right into the key cards for this deck. So, how are we gonna break this up? We're gonna talk about just key cards that are good in all versions of Chane first, and then we'll talk about the actual archetypes later in the episode. So let's start with the best cards in the set for Chane. We're gonna talk about the equipment first. It's gonna be Ebon Fold, Aether Ironweave, and Stubbies. Those are the three equipment that you're gonna be looking for to have a successful Chane deck, no matter what kind of Chane you are.
Yeah, and of these, I think Ebenfold and Aether Ironweave are pretty high picks. Ebenfold's pretty strong in either Levia or Chane, so it's a flexible pick that is also powerful. And then Aether Ironweave is just so good. Stubbies, I do think is good in Chane, but I'm often picking it up a little bit later. Like I kind of want to. It's kind of your reward for being Chane because I think that's the deck that it fits into best. Although Bolton can also play it.
I have also started to like Stubby Hammers and Prism now. Cards sweet everywhere, I think, but that might be just like a later episode kind of topic.
Yeah, Jay has discovered that you can just put Belittle Minnowism in every deck, and why not? It's pretty good.
Yeah, it helps you swing your auras with Belittle. That being said, let's talk about Aether Iron Weave a little bit more in detail. So this card is a Runeblade equipment chest, so only Chane can play it. It has Battle Sworn 1, so it just gains you 1 life right off the bat. That already is pretty broken. And it has an action ability that has Go Again, that just generates you 2 resources if you've played a non-attack action and an attack action. So what this basically means, though, is that for you to effectively use Aether Ironweave, you do need to play a non-attack action. So if you're planning to pop this off on your combo turn, you have to have a non-attack action incorporated in that turn. I guess for the combo deck, it's just like there's no way you can kill your opponent with the non-attack actions, anyways, right?
Yeah, typically. I think there's like some different flavors of it, but you definitely do probably want to have a non-attack action at least. And sometimes I actually had this on the weekend. I had a deck with like 5 non-attack actions. It was much lower than I'd like. In that deck, it just meant when I draw something like a red Minnowism, I'm arsenaling that and saving it to the last turn because like I might just banish the rest of them and not see them kind of thing. So you can definitely, if you know that your pitch deck doesn't have non-attack actions, you can also kind of fix for it by arsenaling a card as well.
I see. Just like arsenaling and keeping it there, so on your last turn you can pop off.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, and then So then we're gonna just move away from the equipments and talk about arcane damage in general. In this set, arcane damage is very hard to block. Right? We don't have any. What is it called?
Arcane Barrier.
Arcane Barrier, yes. We don't have any Arcane Barrier. There are some cards with Spell Void, but those are typically actually on cards that have good activated abilities anyways. So it puts your opponent in a spot where if they end up using their Spell Void on those cards, it actually like turns that card off. So just Arcane damage in general is very powerful in this format. And the main 2 cards that you want to be looking for will be Vexing Malice, which this card actually does 2 arcane damage on attack, or archaic crackle, which is a 1 arcane damage on attack. Do you want to talk more about arcane damage in this 4 Chane, I guess?
Arcane damage kind of fulfills a couple roles. The first one is that often in Chane, your early turns aren't necessarily great at pushing damage, you often need like a couple, like it's when you start getting one or two hits off of your shackles that you start really getting these crazy turns for the most part. And Arcane sort of lets you help chip damage early to kind of soften up the opponent and make that, like making that spike turn that you need to have to go over the top not quite as big because you've been whittling them down with arcane damage. It also enables certain cards. So there are payoffs for having dealt arcane damage, like Rip Through Reality, which is a 2 for 4 that can be played from Banish. And if you've dealt arcane damage, it has Go Again, as well as Piercing Shadow Vise, which is also a 2 for 4 at red that can be played from Banish. But if you've dealt arcane damage, it gets +2, so it will be a 2 for 6. So if you have these cards in your deck, you also want to have arcane damage in your deck to turn them on, although the arcane damage is just good in general as a way to either close the game or soften up the opponent so that you can combo them out and go over the top.
Yeah, there's actually an interesting play where you can do, not a play, but just like a game plan you can have with Chane of like if you can count to like 21 with arcane damage, you don't actually have to shackle and just play 21 points of arcane damage and your opponent can't actually block it all. I wouldn't recommend this as you're just gonna get outvalued by cards that are more efficient than you, like Prism cards, Bolton swinging their axes, Levia's just cards in general is just like above rate in general. So you'll end up losing the game if you try and count the 20 with only arcane damage. But that being said, there isn't arcane barrier in this set. So if you can count to 20 with arcane damage, they are definitely dead.
I think if the deck is low powered, this kind of strategy can be like a good kind of backup plan. But if the decks in the pot are high power level, the problem is like you probably have to block with too many of those arcane cards if your opponent is doing like powerful stuff, and there's a lot of powerful things to do in Monarch. There's no way you're going to be able to play like all those, because most of them are like 1 to 2 points. So you're relying on playing like 20 cards in your deck, and just,
It's not
if your
happening.
opponent's attacking you for 10 a turn, you're not getting there, for example.
Okay, this is a generic that's just like really good in Chane. The last card I want to talk about will be Tremor of. I don't know how to pronounce this card, Yuki. You gotta
I
help
don't
me
know
out.
either. I think it's Irathael, but I'm not sure.
Yep, I'm not even gonna attempt this card, so I'm just gonna explain it. This is a generic 1 cost, and it attacks for 4 for the red one, blocks for 2, and it says if a card has been put into your banish zone this turn, Tremor gains 2 power. So yellow one attacks for 3, blue one attacks for 2. And this card is just above rate in Chane, because if you have 1 shackle, then you're always getting a card in banish every single turn. So the red one just naturally attacks for 6, the yellow one naturally attacks for 5, and the blue one naturally attacks for 4, which is just all above rate for their color.
Maybe the other generic attack action that you can look out for that is not nearly as powerful but is still good in Chane is Yinti Yanti. This is a 0 for 3 that blocks 2 at red, but it gets +1 attack and +1 defense if you have an aura. And notably, soul shackles are auras. So similarly, so long as you've made a soul shackle, which you can do for free, Yinti Yanti is basically a wounded blow.
Blow.
Yeah, the 4 for 0 from WTR. So this is not like a reason to draft Chane. It's not even like a crazy powerful card. It's about as good as Wounded Blow is. It's just that you tend to get this card late because most other decks don't want it. Prism is the only other deck that can have an aura, but is far less reliable than Chane. And so it's kind of like a reward for being Chane that you can pick up late in the pack that you can keep an eye out for. It's just very solid.
Yeah, so don't pick this highly, but expect to get it in the wheel, I think is the best way to visualize this card. Is like you see it in like pack 3, you'll be like, okay, I'm gonna be Chane, and I'm probably the only one that wants this card.
Yeah, exactly. Other attack actions that are worth mentioning, Soul Reaping is a big one. This is a 6 cost, 6 power attack that blocks for 3, but it has an alternate cost of being able to banish any number of cards from your hand instead of paying its resource cost. So really, you banish a card from your hand and it attacks for 6. Additionally, if you've banished any blood debt cards, you get 1 resource for each blood debt card banished that way. So the idea is if you have like 2 Seeds of Agony in your hand, you can Soul Reaping, banish the 2 Seeds of Agony that have blood debt, you get 2 resources, and then you can play those blood debt cards from your banish, so you're not really even down those cards at all. Soul Reaping is one of the best cards in the set, I think, for draft. It's just super, super powerful, and I would be happy to pick one this card. It's like a huge reason to beat Chane. And if anybody ever passes this to me, I'm taking it as a very strong signal that, like, I'm almost just picking it and just forcing Chane at that point. Especially if it's like pick 3 or something, I'm like, okay, the 2 people passing to me are not Chane.
Yeah, that's a good heuristic to have. The other thing, the common misconception with this card, the card you banish does not have to have blood debt. You can banish any card, including generics without blood debt or just random shadow cards. It's just a alternate cost to playing the card. It only checks to see if blood debt to generate resources. And then the other thing with this card would be the last line of text. This is while Soul Reaping is attacking a hero with 1 or more cards in their soul, it has go again. One thing you do have to be careful about is against Prism. If they remove their card in Soul before the resolution step, is it resolution step where go again resolves?
I think it's technically the link step, but they can just do it anytime during reactions or during during the resolution when all the hit triggers would happen.
Okay, yeah. So before the link step, if Prism makes a spectral shield, like even after damage, then Soul Reaping will lose go again, and it just it won't have gained go again. You could have a turn where it completely falls apart just because you forgot that this card can lose go again. So that's just like the 2 things that you should keep in mind about this card. That this card is easier to play than you think, and that this card sometimes loses go again if they can remove all cards in their soul.
Yeah, in general, if Prism has exactly 1 card in Soul, you need to be careful of that because they can just activate their hero ability and clear it out. If they have 2 cards in Soul, there's no real way for her to take care of 2 cards out of Soul at once.
So the next couple of cards will be just generic good cards for Chane. This is going to be Ghostly Touch Red and Void Wraith Red. These cards basically do the exact same thing. They're shadow action attacks, and they can both be played from the Banish Zone. The Ghostly Visit Red is a 1 cost attacks 4. Void Wraith is a 2 cost attacks for 5. Just good efficient cards.
When you hit these off blood debt, they are just really solid. And even when they're in your hand, they're like slightly below rate, but not too bad. And the upside of being able to get extra cards from your blood debt more than makes up for it.
Yeah, that's just like when you naturally get these off of like shackles, it feels like you just drew an extra card, like really.
Yeah, I mean, you pretty much did. Maybe the final attack action to talk about that's at rare is Unhallowed Rites. It's also a 1 for 4, and it has the clause that you can play it from Banish only if you've played a non-attack action this turn. And when it attacks, you can put a non-attack action with Blood Debt onto the bottom of your deck. So
from your graveyard.
From your graveyard onto the bottom of your deck. So this works really well with Seeds. This also works really well with Howl, and is just a free way to set up your second cycle pitch stack where you have that one last big turn with a bunch of extra blood deck cards. You just get to do that for free because you don't even have to pitch the card. You can just play your play your Howl from Beyond earlier in the game, then play your Unhallowed Rites and put it on the bottom of your deck so that you get to draw it again in your pitch deck, for example.
Yep. Just a small rules thing. All non-attack actions that you play immediately go to the graveyard, unlike the combat chain cards. So if you play, let's say, Howl from Beyond right before Unhallowed Rites, and then played Unhallowed Rites, Howl from Beyond is technically in your graveyard, so you can bottom deck the Howl, and then the Howl will still give this card plus 3 attack if you're playing the red Howl. So just keep in mind that the non-attack action card you played from Banish that turn, you can still bottom deck as well.
Yeah, and maybe one other rules thing about this card is that if you do bottom a non-attack action, just keep in mind that you still played it if you're also playing a Riftbind on that turn. Because Riftbind just cares that the card was played. I know like a lot of people like to leave the non-attack actions out so that it's like easy to track with Riftbind, and you can do that. But just remember that if you do bottom a blood debt card, it's still that card still was played and still buffs your Riftbind. So just make sure you're not losing value there.
Unhollowed Rights is like such a cool card and good design and stuff like that. But then when you like actually play with the card, it like creates these like really awkward situations where it'd be like, oh wait, I forgot Riftbind should have been like 5 instead of 4 last turn. Or even small things like, oh, I put the seeds in the bottom. I forgot I've actually dealt arcane damage last turn. Then my piercing shadow vice should have been 6 instead of 4. It creates some awkward things like that sometimes.
Yeah. So just stuff to look out for if you're playing it.
I guess just lastly, we touched on this last week on the Monarch overview, but poppers are still good. And Chane, you get to play Lunar Tide Plunderers, which is a shadow card that just is a 3 for 7, and the yellow one's a 3 for 6. So you get those in addition to the generic six power poppers.
Yeah, and they're all pretty strong. The shadow ones are especially nice because you can give them go again with Soul Shackle, but you can still pretty comfortably end on like a Rally the Rear Guard or something, and that's also totally fine.
I was thinking about Surging Militia. Surging Militia is still good in Chain 2. This is a red 2 for 5. If it's blocked by a non-equipment, it gets +1 power. We'll talk a little bit more about Surging Militia a little bit later in this episode, but this card's good too, so just keep that in mind.
Okay, on to the non-attack actions. First up, surprise to nobody probably, is Seeds of Agony. The card was banned and constructed. It just deals one. It essentially deals 1 arcane and can be played from Blood Debt. Keep in mind that you do have to be able to trigger it, and notably the blue seeds only triggers if you only gives the 1 arcane damage if you play a attack action with cost 0. So if you are relying on things like blue seeds, you do need to have something like a bounding demagon to be able to trigger them. But yeah, these are essentially free arcane damage that you can pitch stack. I personally like the yellow and the blue ones the best because you can just pitch them early. Like you don't really want to be, if you draw it, you don't really want to be playing a card for 1 value. But if you pitch it as a resource card and then in the late game get it for free off of your Soul Shackles, it ends up being very powerful.
That being said, don't discount the red Seeds of Agony. I think if
Yeah.
you see it, you probably just need to pick it, just because you can still pitch this card. It only generates 1 mana, but it does 1 damage later in the game when you banish it off the pitch stack on the Soul Shackle. So even if it only generates you 1 resource, it still does 1 damage. So it's like an opposite of a Heart of Fendel, basically, where you pitch it, again, it gets you resources and it does 1 damage instead of gaining your life.
Yeah, that's a good way of thinking of it. And it can often be more than 1 damage if you combine it with, again, the classic constructed combo of Riftbind, which we can talk about it now, but it's a 1 for 3 with Blood Debt, and it gets, if you play it from Banish, it gets +1 for each non-attack action you've played this turn. And so, you know, with your seeds is now effectively 2 damage. If you're playing 2 Riftbinds in the turn, your seeds is now effectively 3 damage. So it's like a 3 damage blue that you pitch to the bottom of your deck in the right setup. So yeah, seeds is just really, really strong. And it's the only non-attack action with Blood Debt that you can really reliably get at common.
It's the only
Yeah.
non-attack action. Yeah, it's just straight up the only one.
It's the only one at common. There's a couple rares which are also on this list of premiums, but non-attacks with Blood Debt are premium because there's just way more attacks than non-attacks, basically.
Yeah, that's a good way of saying it. The next card on the list will be Howl from Beyond Red. This one specifically has to be the red one, unlike Seeds. This card gives the next attack action +3 power, and it has Blood Debt and can be played from your banish. It's very similar to Seeds of Agony. I think I would almost always pitch this card if I can, just because it's better on the second cycle anyways. But this one in particular, you could play from your hand. It's not like that bad. It is a 2 for 3 go again, so it's like pretty below rate. But that being said, like if you're like desperate to play the non-attack action this turn, like it's not the worst playing from your hand.
Yeah, it pairs well with stuff like Bounding Demagon because you get the bounding from, like, if you flip the bounding off the top with Soul Shackle, Howl bounding is 7 damage off 2 resources, and it essentially cost you only 1 card because of only the Howl you had to draw. One card and 2 resources, but still.
It's actually pretty sweet if you have like unhollowed rights. If you naturally vanish on unhollowed rights, if you do howl into unhollowed, then the howl actually just goes back to the bottom of the deck. So it's like you've pitched it anyways.
Yeah, and something worth noting is that if you have unhollowed rights, you can and probably will want to play your howl and then bottom it with the unhollowed rights later in the game.
And then the next card will be Seeping Shadows Yellow and Blue. This card is, I guess we should explain the card real quick. 1 second. So Seeping Shadows Blue, I'm going to read this one. It costs 3, and it says you may play Seeping Shadow from your banish zone. The next attack action card with cost 0 you play this turn gains +1 power, and go again. This card has go again, and has Blood Debt.
And notably, the power isn't what scales up with pitch, it's the restrictiveness of it. So the blue is only 0 costs or less. The reds are 1 cost or less. Sorry, the yellow is 1 cost or less. And the red gives go again to anything 2 cost or less. So while the red is more flexible, really you kind of want to be pitching this card and getting it. Because again, 3 resources for an action point and a card is like 3 resources and a card for an action point and 1 damage is like way, way, way below rate. But if you can pitch it to your second cycle and have a big combo turn with this, and it's kind of instrumental in that because it gives you an extra action point to play all of your cards, then suddenly it's a very good card. And for that reason, the yellows and the blues are much better than the red because you can pitch them and not be too far below rate when you do that.
Just another point, if you do end up playing like a red Seeping Shadows, this card gives any attack action with cost 2 or less +1 and go again. So it can give your generics go again as well. I do see some people misunderstanding this card that it has to be like a shadow card or a Runeblade card like Chane's ability, but that's not true. This card will give any attack action go again and the power if you need to.
Yeah, definitely.
The next card would be Minnowism Red. So this is part of the Belittle Minnowism package, but you don't need to have Belittle for Minnowism to be good. It's essentially just a... what is that card called?
Nimblism.
Yeah, Nimblism. It's exactly like Nimblism, right?
Yeah, essentially, but Nimblism is also particularly good in Chane because I guess he has a lot of stuff that's power 3 or less, especially because it's base power. So like Riftbind and Bounding Demigon at red just get hit by Minnowism naturally. You also want non-attack actions because stuff like Unhallowed Rights and Bounding Demigon require you to play a non-attack action in order to play them at all, and then Riftbind gets pumped up by your non-attack actions. So Minnowism is just one of the best ways to do that. 3 for 0, go again at red is just really good.
Yeah, it ends up just being like a head jab that turns on your turns. And playing that card at red is the perfect color to do it. The yellow and the blue is just like significantly worse. The blue is obviously playable if you're playing Belittle, but if you don't have Belittle, then just the red one is good. And if you are playing Belittle, the red one is really good. So, yeah.
And then finally, our last non-attack action here is Warmonger's Recital. This is a 1 for 3, 1 for +3 on your next attack. So not quite as efficient as the Minnowism, but it works on any attack. And additionally, it gives that attack, if it hits, that attack goes to the bottom of your deck. So again, we've been talking about the importance of your pitch stack, but this card can enable some really good things. Like if you hit a red Riftbind early and you can't really afford to leave it there to keep getting blood debt, if you play a Warmonger's Recital into the red Riftbind, it gets +3 from the Warmongers, +1 from having played a non-attack action, and is coming in for 7, which is an awkward breakpoint. And if it hits, then you have a red Riftbind in your pitch deck for your combo turn. So it has some really nice play patterns, and just getting to send your blood deck cards. It works in a similar way with like Ghostly Touch. You can 2 for 7 with a Ghostly Touch and goes to the bottom of your deck if it hits, which is just really, really strong because it's almost like a delayed card draw if it hits.
Yeah. And even better than that, Chane can give the Ghostly Touch or Riftbind go again. And if you pitch the blue, you have 1 resources left to like swing your Galaxy Block that's already turned on now.
Yeah. So all of a sudden you're kind of doing the math, right? You pitch a blue and a Warmonger's Recital, and if you have a Ghostly Touch like already in your banish, or you hit it off the top, you're dealing 7 damage plus 3 for the Galaxy Black is like a 2-card 10, which is just insane.
Yeah, with on hit pseudo draw a card and on hit deal one arcane on the Galaxy Black.
Yeah. And it works with a whole bunch of cards. It works with Unhallowed Rites, Riftbind, Bounding, Ghostly. Very, very good.
Just super solid. Honestly, Red Warmonger's Recital just a pretty strong card in this set in general. Like almost all the heroes want this card.
Yeah, it's just very good.
Okay, so those were mostly all of the key cards or just good cards in like all versions of Chane. Some of the other cards you think are good might just be for like a specific version of Chane, or we're going to talk about an aggro chain list and a combo endgame chain list, and we'll talk about more cards there. But before we go into that, let's talk about the Majestics and if they're either good or unplayable. So we're talking about the good ones first. I think pretty obviously, or it might not even be obvious. Shadow of Ursa is a very, very good card.
It's a blue 0 for 2. You can play it from your Banished Zone and it blocks 3. It's an attack. And it says that as an additional cost to play Shadow of Ursa, you may banish a card with Blood Debt from your hand. And if you do, it gains Go again and it has Blood Debt. This is a great way to go wide. It's also a resource card that has Blood Debt and goes wide on your combo turn at the end. The cost of banishing a Blood Debt card is, again, not really a cost, assuming you wanted to play that card anyways. So yeah, it's just like, what is it? It's like a blue, but it comes in as if it's a yellow head jab and it blocks 3, which is already a good card. And then you can also just pitch it and draw it for free later.
Yeah, like honestly, the first time I read this card, or even now when I read this card and look at it, I'm just like, how is this card on a radar good? And then you play with this card like 4 or 5 times, and you're just like, okay, yeah, Shadow of Ursa just like enables the most disgusting of turns in Chain, and a Shadow of Ursa is just like an all rounder, just A plus.
Yeah, it's like kind of subtly powerful, but it's like it's like a great glue piece. It just kind of like ties the whole deck together and it does everything you want. It's like you can draw it and play it and it's still pretty okay. You can pitch it for late game and it helps your combo turn. Like it just does everything.
Would you draft this card highly though?
It's a good question. I might, honestly.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I think if I know I'm in Chain, this card becomes like a super high pick. But I don't know if I will move into Chain for Shadow Verser.
Yeah, I guess it depends on the pack. I think it's like right on that line. I would consider picking it. Like I could pick one this card and be like reasonably happy with it. I don't know. I feel like there's probably better pick ones, but it's still pretty solid.
I think I agree with that. The next Majestic on this list will be Invert Existence. This card is very good. You do need to be careful about who you play this card into, but almost every deck in the format should play non-attack actions. And in the mirror, it can get very awkward, but at the same time, very powerful. I don't know how to explain the power level on this card.
It's just it doesn't take an action because it's an instant. So it's like one cost, deal 2 unblockable damage that's also a blue and goes into your pitch stack for your combo turn because you can play it from Banish for free. So it's just a blue that you pitch, and then at the end game, you just get to, at some point, go 1 resource, deal 2 unblockable to you. So it's like a blue that almost makes your opponent start with 2 less life, assuming they have attacks and non-attacks, which is
It's almost any deck.
I guess it's almost like equipment in terms of power level because like you don't have to draw it. Like even though like you do draw it and it's in your deck and like you may do it that way, like often you don't have to draw this card because of Shackle to get its value.
A cool line to do as well with this card, if you're playing the mirror, is you can intentionally give them cards with blood debt that they can play again to do 4 unblockable damage. So if after they've played all their cards with their action point, if you invert existence and give them like a bounding demigod and a howl from beyond or something, it'll do this card will do 2 damage to them, and then they'll take 2 more from blood debt. So it's like 4 unblockable for 1 resource, which is insane.
Yeah, you can just kind of kill people out of nowhere with it, which is really nice.
One thing to note though is if you do that and if they don't die, then those howl and boundings is gonna come back at you. So just be careful on that and maybe not do that unless your opponent's actually gonna die.
All right, the next card is Shadow Puppetry. Again, this card saw constructed play, so maybe that's just like a good heuristic for Chane, is like if you know what the constructed Chane decks look like and that card was in the constructed Chane deck, it's probably good. There's other good cards too, but yeah. Shadow Puppetry is a red 0 cost that blocks 2. It's a non-attack action, and it says the next attack action card you play gains go again and +1 attack. And if this hits, look at the top card of your deck, you may banish it. So yeah, just giving because you have so many extra cards with Blood Debt, giving +1 attack and go again to one of them is just really strong, and it's a non-attack, which you want some of anyways. And it also gives, like, I don't know, if half of your deck is Blood Debt, then this will draw a card half of the time because you can banish a card roughly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. On
It's
hit,
like pseudo card draw. It's like draw half a card.
yeah. It depends on how much blood debt cards you have in your deck. The more you do, the higher this card is like a draw card, and lower the count, the less that on hit matters. But at the same time, how does your opponent know?
It's always like scary to let this card hit.
Yeah, your opponent can never actually know if how condensed you are, and to them, it's basically like, oh, they got to draw a card.
And again, non-attacks premium. There's just not that many good ones.
Let's talk about Sonata then. Sonata is it's an interesting one. So this one is a Runeblade action card, non-attack action, and it costs XX, so X can be 0. This says reveal the top X+3 cards of your deck. For each non-attack action revealed this way, put an action card revealed this way into your hand. Deal an arcane damage for each card you added. Shuffle your deck after this card resolves. And let's go again. Personally, I don't think this card is that good in draft because it's so hard to get non-attack actions. But this card can turn into a premium if you have like the nice 50-50 split on attack actions and non-attack actions. Where do you lie on this card?
I feel like I just never have the 50-50 split on attack actions and non-attack actions, so I kind of don't like this card.
Like, how early would you pick this card? Like, if let's say there's like,
I don't think I'd pick this card. I think there'd either have to be like nothing else relevant in the pack really, or I already have like multiple non-attack actions and I can play it. Because like I just feel like, yeah, I don't know. I feel like just having it early is not like it. You can draft around it, but I don't know that it's worth drafting around, and it's still going to be hard to get the non-attack actions. I think it also will mess with your pitch stack, which like might just make it not worth it in general, because in draft you hit your pitch really fast. Like 30 cards is not very many.
it's 4 turns and you hit your pitch stack, something like that. 4,
Yeah.
8, 12 plus 10. Sorry, 5 turns. On your 5th turn, you're definitely at your pitch stack.
I don't like Sonata.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Then next, we'll talk about Dimensional Crossroads. I didn't like this card, but right before the episode, we are talking about it. I think Yuki brought me up on this card. Why do you think this card is good?
It being a yellow block 3 that's also a non-attack action, and we've been talking about that importance, is like a lot of what makes this card kind of acceptable. It can just do some stuff. It is pretty far below rate in most decks, but I had a game where I opened this on turn 0 and I just got to play this, and it helped me also pitch stack my second cycle without letting my opponent filter. And I think it did like 3 or 4 arcane damage, which is just my opponent basically just started with 3 or 4 less life. So I don't know that this card is a super high pick, but certainly going first, I think always play this card just for the upside of it. If you're low on non-attack actions and you need them, it's still pretty solid.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And you're just saying that this is just like a yellow block 3. So, any card that blocks 3 is like, you can just block with it. And that really just blew my mind. I was like, oh yeah, you don't have to play this card. You can just block with it and you'll be happy with it.
Yep. Yeah, it's just fine.
And I always forget, like, a lot of the non-attack actions only block for 2. So you do want like a lot of non-attack actions, but the more you have, the less your deck blocks. And this card being a non-attack action that blocks for 3 is like, that's solid.
Yeah, it's just pretty okay. And then finally, Dread Scythe, Majestic Weapon, once per turn action, pay 3 resources and attack for 3. And whenever you attack with Dread Scythe, deal 1 arcane damage to a defending hero. This is just an attack trigger. It doesn't have to hit. Also, a hero dealt damage by Dread Scythe can't gain life during their next action phase. The gain life is like basically irrelevant. I guess like Lumina Ascension can technically gain life, but it's not really going to come up for the most part. But this card is, I think you can build around this card if you get it. I've never been able to do it myself, but just you can almost like play a Guardian deck where you just play 3 blocks and then pitch a blue Dread Scythe for 3 and 1 unblockable over and over again, and it's probably pretty okay.
Yeah, honestly, I've done it once. It's if you pack one, pick one, a Dread Scythe, then you actually get to warp all of your picks. Any 3 block becomes premium. You actually don't need to shackle that often with a Dread Scythe. You just don't need to. If you go block for 9, Dread Scythe, it's just like a 13 damage turn cycle. And if you do that over and over again, the one unblockable will start to whittle down your opponent. This card will start doing very good things with like Arcanic Crackle, Vexing Malice, generic 2 cost reds that attack for a lot. If you have Rip Through Realities, you can go Dread Scythe, deal 1 Arcane. Now Rip Through always hits for 4 go again. Same with Piercing Shadow Vise. If you go Dread Scythe, Chane, Soul Shackle, Dread Scythe to give that card go again. Then pitch another card to Piercing Shadow Vise for 6 from Banish is pretty strong. There's just like a lot of good like Dread Scythe becomes like a really good like 1 to maybe 3 shackle chain deck where you stop making soul shackles at like 1 or 2 shackles and you play like 7 or 8, maybe 9 turns with Dread Scythe. And honestly, it's like a deck on its own, and you don't get to draft this unless you open a Dread Scythe. But when you do pack one, pick one, and Dread Scythe, it's pretty powerful, honestly.
Yeah, I haven't gotten to do this, but it's very much a card that you need to have built around. So if you see it early, you can do it. But like if you're getting this like late pack 3, this probably doesn't just slot into your chain deck.
That's a good question, actually. Is this card just always better than Galaxy Black?
I don't know if it is. I think it would probably depend on your blue count. Like to play Dread Scythe, I would want a high blue count.
Yeah, I think I would like 15, 16 blues, honestly.
Yeah, because like ideally you're giving this go again and then you're doing other stuff. And I think it gets better with stuff like the rips and piercing shadow vice that you mentioned. But I think you need a high blue count. And if you don't have that, it's a little bit awkward. I don't know if I would be inclined to play this card. Maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's still just fine as a way to close out the game in the end game.
Yeah, actually, it's pretty interesting. Like, if you're playing this card in like the aggro version of the chain, if you just make sure you keep 1 blue, then this is the arcane damage that you're missing. At the end of the game to close out if you really need to.
Yeah, maybe it's just good. I don't know. If any of our listeners have experience with this card and just like a situation where you didn't get to build around it, we'd love to hear about your thoughts down in the comments. That'd be
Mhm.
really interesting to hear about.
Yeah, if you get this late, anyways, like I would like probably pick things like Seeds of Agony over this card, anyways. But like, if it comes to you like pack 3, pick 5 or something, I would probably just pick it up, and it might be like a small upgrade to Galaxy Black.
The other majestics, I think we're just going to kind of skip over, but Mutated Mass is not fantastic. Tome of Torment and Guardian of the Shadow Realm are. Can I say that these cards are like not cards you should be putting in your deck? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I would almost never play those cards. Muted Mass is like a pet card for me. You can do some very interesting pitch stack. Like you can try and make sure that the cards you draw are 0 cost, 1 cost, and 2 cost, by like intentionally pitching like a red 2 cost or something like that. But it's like you can be very creative with Muted Mass and it could win you games, but I think it would kill you more often than not. So I would stay away from it unless you really want to like put yourself through that hellhole.
Yeah, it's probably okay in the combo version now that I think about it, because you often pitch 2 blues. So it's probably okay there. It can be like kind of like a blue ghostly visit that doesn't block, which is fine. But yeah, this card is, even though it's majestic, like you probably want to steer away from it.
Yeah, Tomo Torment Guardian, just don't play it. Tomo Torment is awkward. It's always awkward. It's just don't do it.
It doesn't have go again is the problem, and it only draws 1 card. It's just like, it doesn't do anything that you need. You can shackle it, but like you're usually more gated on action points than you are in need of like an
a
extra card.
card. Yeah. It's awkward. It's like it can come in clutch where it's like you're like forced to block with all four cards in hand. So you go like Shackle, Tomor Torment, and pitch it to now attack with your weapon might be cool, but like it's yeah, it's not exactly what you want to be doing.
Okay, you want to carry on to the archetypes here?
Yeah, let's do that.
So we've been talking about it. There's sort of this more aggressive focused chain deck and a more combo focused chain deck. I think that you can actually kind of think of these as a little bit of a spectrum. Like I think you can go really hard in either direction, and I think you can also play something in the middle that has like a little bit of an aggro package and then a little bit of a combo package, and its combo is like not quite as big but still enough to close out the game. So there's like a little bit of a sliding scale here. We've spent so long talking about different cards that are just good in Chane, which I think should tell you that there's a lot of overlap between these archetypes, and you can often decide which one you are kind of later in the draft as you start having more cards in your pool. It's not like you need to be deciding right away, this is the one that I'm drafting. You can kind of figure it out as you go along based on what cards you're seeing.
Yeah. The one caveat to this will be belittle minnowism. Belittle will if you are using belittle to look for your deck for a minnowism, it shuffles your deck. And if you shuffle your deck, your combo end game will be very difficult to set up. So the if you are playing belittle as like a way to find minnowism, then it could just make it so that you can't really do a combo end game unless I don't know. Is that even possible to play Belittle in a combo version of the deck?
I think you can still play it, but you need to be careful about. You basically don't want to shuffle if you're too far down your like too late into the game, but if it's on turn like the first like one or two turns of the game, you can do it and it's pretty okay. Um yeah,
Hmm.
that's basically what I would say. But I think it's also just fine. Like 1 for 3 go again is like it sounds kind of silly, but is actually fine in a chain. You have so many cards that again, the action points are a big concern, and just finding more ways to have go again is pretty powerful.
The aggro version of Chain, I like to play like even yellow and blue Belittles to go look for minimalisms. If you go that far, then you definitely can't play that combo end game because then you're like constantly shuffling your deck with finding minimalism over and over again.
Yeah, that makes sense. So maybe jumping into the aggro deck, outside of Belittle and obviously Minnowism, what other cards are kind of defining that aggro chain deck for you?
The cards I really like in this deck would be Rip Through Reality. I think this is as we keep on saying that this chain gets gated by action points. Rip Through Reality is the 2 cost attack action. At red, it attacks for 4, and if you've the Arcane, this card has Go Again. It's not the easiest to deal Arcane, but combined with a card called Rifted Torment, which is a card that I also like in the aggro version of Chain, which is also a 2 cost that attacks for 4. But if it's played from your Banish Zone, it does 1 Arcane damage. So what you can actually set up turns is if you start with a Belittle, finding a blue Minnowism, um, and the card you revealed is also blue, then you have 5 resources left over after playing Belittle. You can go something like Belittle, Chain, make a Soul Shackle, Rift to Torment, deal one Arcane, attack for 4, Rip Through Reality for 4, attack with Galaxy Black. So you end up attacking for 3 from Belittle, 4 from Rip, 4 from Rifted, 1 Arcane, and 3 from Galaxy Black. And you can have these like pretty consistent go wide attack 4-3 4-4-3 kind of turns continuously, and to do that you just need like multiple copies of these 2 cost play from banish zones, and I think that's what really like makes these aggro turns really powerful is on like shackle 2 and 3. If you can keep on consistently doing this kind of like very high tempo turns, that's how you like really win with the aggro version.
That makes sense. And then maybe the another question for you is how many blues are you playing in the aggro version? Because it sounds like there's quite a few 2 costs in there.
Yeah, so in this version, you were playing like all the generic 2 costs, like end your turn with it as well. So you have like a bunch of the poppers as well. For this version, I think minimum you need 9, and I play up to like 13 or even 14 blues in this deck. That being said, I count every color of belittle as a blue. So, like, if I have two red belittles and a blue minnowism in my deck, then that will count towards the blue count. So I could have like 10 blues and like two red belittles and a yellow belittle, and that'll be my 13 blues kind of thing.
I don't know. Is it fair to say, like, my feeling on this, I kind of agree with that, but I also feel like I don't really want to go below like maybe like eight actual blues. Like, if I think if you start counting, like, I have like five blues in my deck and I have like four belittles, like, that's getting a little sketch for me.
Ooh, that is true. But if you have four belittles, like it always because Chain's card almost all activate like you can reveal for belittle. Even if you go like pitch, let's say like a red Seeds of Agony to play belittle, find the minnowism, you could turn that into like a real turn. So I would try and get at least like 6, 7 blues at a minimum, but yeah, like once you dip below 6, you probably do just need to pick like any playable blue card just to get your blue count up.
And then what is how are you deciding when to play more like 9 or more like 13? Is a lot of that like the amount of belittles that you have, or does it depend on the kind of blue cards you have access to?
This just really comes down to like how many two costs that I have that can be played from Banish. The more copies of Rifted Torments and Rip Through Reality, the more blues you just need to be able to go basically play out your Banish zone or your hand. The more two costs that you can play for Banish, the more blues you need. I don't really have an exact number, but if you have like four Rifted Torments in your deck, you probably need to be close to the, double digit blue counts. And the less Rifted Torments and like the more Bounding Demigod type of cards you have, the less blues you actually need.
That makes a lot of sense. Anything else about the aggro chain deck before you carry on?
Yeah, I think the last thing will be two cost generics. I think I talked about Surging Militia earlier in the episode. This is like a great spot for Surging Militia where you do these like really smaller attacks in the beginning and you end with like a Surging Militia. Um, they either have to like just eat the 5 or they have to block this card to like prevent the most amount of damage. And the more you're forcing your opponent to block, the better Surging Militia gets. So same with like Stony Woot Hog and just honestly any of the two costs for 6 in this set. Even cards like Adrenaline Rush is just like very powerful. If you can do for 2 for 7 at the very end, you are gonna be needing this like higher damage output end game. Even cards like Out Muscle and Pound for a Pound, just high numbers are very good in this version of the deck. And Chain is very susceptible to getting decked out. And if you don't have enough damage and you're only coming in for like 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, you're gonna get decked out. So you just do need to make sure you have the 5s and the 6s and the 7s in your deck to be able to close out the game.
Makes a lot of sense. One other play to look out for with Surging Militia is if you can ever increase its power, it's very hard to deal with. Like if you can play Red Warmongers into Surging Militia, come in for 8, it's just so hard to deal with because every card they add ends up increasing its power. So even if they give you like three blocks, it gets pumped for 3 and they're still, so it goes up to 11 and they're still leaking 2. So if they actually want to fully block this out, it actually just takes 4 3 blocks to block out. So just like a really good way to close games. And I think you can kind of keep that in mind and apply that to any hero in the format. There's multiple pumps in the format, and Surging Militia is a generic, and just in general, it's really good at closing games especially if you can pump it.
Do you want to explain a little bit more about the combo side of the deck?
Yeah, so when you're leaning more into the combo endgame, you are hoping to have multiple cards in Blood Debt at the end of the game in your banish and just kind of have like a very large combo turn. It's actually pretty flexible in terms of how you can set up your combo. I think you can, one of my big takeaways after having drafted more is that you can make a lot out of a little in this deck so long as you kind of have some of the key pieces. So one thing is that you can definitely do your Riftbind, Seeds, and non-attack actions as like a big combo finish, and that's really strong and something to keep an eye out for. But I don't think it's the only way to go about this. And in addition to having all these seeds and all these non-attack actions to pump up your rift binds, I think the other thing that you really need to have is some way to get extra action points, because I actually had this happen the other just yesterday where my Chane opponent, I think, played four seeds into double rift bind. So that's 14 damage plus the 4 arcane. 18 damage turn, which is pretty good. But like I could block 6 on both of the rift binds, so I took 2 and I leaked 4 arcane. I leaked 6 overall, and that was kind of the extent of his combo turn. And he really needed like one more big attack at the end that I can no longer block because I've given up all my cards to start pushing that into the, like, instead of taking 6, if he can like add a 6 or a 5 to the end, then I'm taking like 11 damage kind of thing, which is very different. So you need some way to get those extra action points. Some of the common ways you can do it is Seeping Shadow, yellow or blue. We talked about this card previously, but it's really important in this archetype. You can also play Time Skippers, which kind of does a similar job. You can pitch a blue to get an action point, and on your final turn, that can be a really, really good way to go a little bit extra wide. Another nice one is Captain's Call, especially at blue or yellow. It can go into your pitch stack. There's a bit of a trick you can do to make sure that you draw it. Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. And then finally, you have Rip Through Reality. I think that the yellow and blue Rip Through Reality are pretty real cards in this combo deck. And I think that there's kind of like, if you don't have the Riftbind Seeds version, like I played a combo version of Chane that was actually based around Rip Through Realities, and I think I had 1 Seeds in the deck. The key thing here is that yellow Rip with stubbies is basically just red Rip Through Reality, but if your curve is relatively low, you can pitch them. So I was setting up endgames with like 2 to 3 Rip Through Realities plus like whatever else, and that's already really good. Like that's already like a lot of damage, right? So I think that's like another way that you can do it. You just need to make sure you have arcane, whether that's yellow Rifted Torment works really well because, again, with stubbies, it's basically red Rifted Torment, and it will turn it on for free. You can also use seeds to turn it on pretty easily, but you do need to make sure you have that. So yeah, you're kind of assembling this big combo turn, and any equipment you can have is also key to kind of going over the top and creating that spike turn. So stubbies is good, Time Skippers is good, and Aether, Iron Weave, and Evenfold are good in general, but I think they're kind of crucial to this combo deck because, again, to play so many cards and play all these Rip Through Realities, like the 2 resources from Aether, Iron Weave just does so much. And Evenfold is a really interesting card in the combo deck because I guess we can read Evenfold. It's a shadow headpiece that has Spell Void 2, and it has an instant ability that costs 1 red and you destroy it. And then you can banish a card from your hand, and if it's a shadow card, you draw a card. Now, the really cute interaction here in your last turn is that every Soul Shackle happens during your action phase, and you get priority before every single Soul Shackle. So you can actually even fold in response to a Soul Shackle to draw a card. And this is really powerful because something you can practice doing is tracking where like a key card that you want to draw is in your pitch stack, and knowing like the way that I do this is like, okay, my third shackle is going to be maybe my blue Captain's Call that we talked about earlier. And then I can do my first 2 shackles and then respond to my third shackle by ebb and folding, banishing a card, drawing that blue Captain's Call that I want to draw, and then I have my extra action point. The most common thing that you're looking for here is a blue to draw into, just so you have lots of resources. But you can also sometimes want something like a red Minnowism, for example, just to pump up your rift binds and give you your non-attack action that you need. So there are other things that you can have, but most frequently it's a blue that you're looking for.
Yeah, that play is pretty sick. It's really funny though. Sometimes I'm watching Yuki play, and she's like you can clearly see that she's like thinking really hard, but she's not exactly sure what the order is on the banish, and she's like sitting there for like 2 minutes. And Ebon, like she has her Ebon fold in her hand, and she's already pitched for it, but she doesn't know where to use it. It's like, do I banish one more card? Yes, no. Think, banish. Okay, is it the next card now?
It definitely is a little bit tricky and rewards practice. I would say that since I think I've moved away from trying to remember my pitch stack and instead just remember the position of the card. So I remember it's going to be my third shackle. And then if I ever, let's say like I can't use a card in my hand and my shackle moves, then I'll know that, well, it's going to be one deeper because I missed a card draw. So it went from 3 down to 4. And then if I end up doing something that accelerates me towards my pitch stack, like I don't know, like a shadow puppetry banishes a card, for example, then I go one card deeper and it becomes one card closer. So if it was at 3, now it's going to be my second one, and I just try to remember that number. And for me, that has been kind of the most reliable way to do it. You can sort of do the math of like, I'm going to draw 4, then shackle like 2 cards, then I'm going to draw 4, shackle 3 cards, draw 4, shackle 4 cards, and so on, and see. I actually count my deck and count it in that way and figure out exactly where it's going to be in my pitch when I'm setting up this combo.
Is I guess a common question would be after that would be, would you shackle no matter what in this deck then? Like even if you didn't have a card to play after the go again card, or like let's say you don't even have a card that can gain go again, would you just shackle no matter what?
Typically, unless you know that you need to fix your pitch stack, if you know that it's off and not shackling will fix it, you can do that. But typically, you're just always shackling because usually it's pretty on rails. I guess we can talk about it now, but the pitch stack math is basically if you play 34 cards and you go first, the first card that you pitch will be the first card that you shackle on your last turn. That doesn't mean you always have to play 34, but it's a good number to have in your head. So, for example, you could play 33 cards and pitch a blue to start, and then know that everything after that blue is going to be your pitch stack, and that way you have a blue for sure in your last turn. And that's like also like a totally reasonable thing to do. I think usually I'm playing like 32 to 34 cards. You don't want to be playing, but you don't want to be playing bad cards, and going a little bit low to guarantee a blue or two in your last hand is like still pretty good.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's just like having this number of like 34 going first is like really good. How does this change if you're going second?
It's sort of hard to calculate because it depends how many cards people strip from your hand. Basically, the way that I would think about it is, so your default is if you go first, the first card that you pitch is going to be the first card that you banish on your last shackle. If you end up drawing cards, like let's say you block with 2 cards on your first turn, and so now you're 2 cards deeper into your pitch stack. So that means you're still going to be shackling cards, but you're going to be shackling like 2 random cards that you don't know what they are. So basically, what this means is that your shackle turn at the end is there's going to be less known cards in your banish, essentially. But typically, you are still pitching for your second for your final shackle. If they take your full 4, it does get a little bit awkward.
Okay. Is maybe a easier way of thinking that would be like you can actually just track how much you are off from 34 as well after you
Yeah.
draw up. And so if you have like a 33 cards after you block, sorry, if you have 4 cards in your hand, let's say you block with 1 card, you were playing 34, you can just play as though it's a 33 card deck from there.
Yeah. Yeah.
That'll probably be the easiest way or the easiest shortcut for doing the pitch stack math. That being said, like sometimes you would forget and like be like, oh wait, did I only draw 3 cards a turn, or like some maybe like you were in a spot where you couldn't arsenal the card in your hand, so you drew up 3 cards. Like you do need to like make a mental note each time you do that, and one of like the top players will be able to adjust these numbers on will. But if you are going to go on rails, it'll be just good to shackle every single turn, and then like no matter if you need it or not, and to just know that if you play 34 cards, every card you pitch should be blood deck cards, so you can play them on your last turn.
And for this reason, going first as Chane is actually pretty okay because sometimes you can just get like two premium. Like it's like a good opportunity to pitch red blood debt cards, for example, to the bottom of your deck, just to guarantee that you see those in your last turn. So going first can be pretty nice, although I still think you prefer to go second, so there's less pressure on you.
Yeah, yeah. I think I agree with that. Yeah, going for actually I've never thought of it that way. If you go first and pitch some reds, it goes in your pitch stack. Yeah, that's pretty solid. That's pretty solid.
Yeah. I don't think it's enough to make you want to go first, but just like we talked about this before on the going first or second episode, but Chane is one of the decks that is pretty good at going first. Arguably in CC, I think he just wanted to go first. In draft, I don't think it is quite the case, but it's close.
Yeah, it's just like in CC you got to like actually build a deck with like only a blood dead card, so every card that you banish was like playable. In draft, it's not the case.
Yeah, and I think grasp is a big part of that too, like as a pitch outlet that lets you like sometimes it's just hard to pitch two cards to the bottom of your deck depending like if you're pitching two reds to the bottom of your deck, you need to have a one cost that you can play. Otherwise it's really awkward. Or like a two cost, I guess. Like if you have like all zeros, it doesn't work, for example.
Okay. Well, either way, even if once you know the pitch stack math, it gets a little bit easier. So practice with that. Just be wary that things can throw it off, and there's like a lot of different ways that it can get thrown off. Be careful when that happens. As we said earlier when we were talking about the archetypes, that the aggro version wants the specific cards I talked about. The combo and game version talks about the cards that they want. And if you've noticed that you can, the combo endgame version really talks about playing blues and yellows. You can do that with also playing the aggro cards. The only difference would be that if you're like too heavily into aggro, you have too many like red rip through realities and red rifted torments. Whereas in the combo ones, you just want like blue versions of the cards. So during the draft portion, you do need to be pretty aware of like how many copies of which versions of cards you have, and if you can actually set up a combo endgame or not would probably be the easiest thing to easiest way to know which version you need to be on.
And I also sort of mentioned it that it's like a little bit of a sliding scale. Like I think you can have like a belittle brandish version that goes wide early and then has not quite as strong of an end game, and that's fine. Just I guess where it really breaks down is if you are searching with belittle repeatedly, then you're going to ruin your pitch stack. So if you're relying on belittle searching a lot, then you really are the aggro version. But if you are just playing like belittle primarily as a go again card, and otherwise you're just utilizing go again with brandish and rifted torments and some of the two costs, you can definitely still play the combo end game, because again, a lot of what you're pitching can be yellow or blue. Like I might be looking to do like the yellow rip through reality, yellow rifted torment setup with stubbies if you're doing that, for example.
Okay, I guess we'll just move on and let's just talk about how to get into the deck.
Yeah, there's kind of a few ways. I think that the biggest pulls into the deck that make me go like, I really want to draft Chane specifically is Aether Iron Weave and Soul Reaping. Do you agree that those are kind of the two biggest reasons to be in Chane?
Yeah, I think so. I think Aether Iron Weave just gaining one life is so good, and Soul Reaping just card's insane. Like you just if you have that like having that card or not having that card is just like I don't even know how to say it. Just like it's so good, it's so good. If you see that card, it's probably a good reason to be in the chain.
Yeah, keep in mind it is legendary, so you probably don't see two because it's a rare and it's short printed, but it is technically legendary. So you cannot pay you cannot play two of them even if you draft two of them. So keep that in mind.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that card is insane, and you should just if you see it, you should pick it.
Soul Reaping is a hard card to open, and let's say Aether Iron Weave doesn't get past you. Is there any other ways to get into the deck?
Yeah, I think after that, the other chain specific card that I'm really looking for is Seeds of Agony. We said how the blue and yellow are especially good, but even the red one is like, I think, a very high pick. And I think, especially if I'm seeing these around like pick 3 or 4, I'm seeing that as a signal. Seeds isn't always like a card that you have to pack one, pick one, but it is a pretty high pick, and it could be pack one, pick one, I guess, if you really want to go chain.
Mm-hmm. And I think conversely, talking about how if you see like a seeds pack one, pick three, that might be like a signal to move in. That also means that if you are passing a Seeds of Agony in pack one, pick two, then you can probably assume somebody on your left will move into Chane for those cards. Because for Chane to be really like above the other decks, they need to have the Seeds of Agony. That's like a pretty good reason for them to move in. So if you pass like two Seeds of Agony early in the draft, you could probably assume that Chain will be cut from your left after that.
And I think the same thing applies to Aether Ironweave and Soul Reaping, although you should probably just be pack one, pick one-ing those.
Yeah, that's fair.
Another way to get into this deck, just the Shadow Reds. So Ghostly Touch, Howl from Beyond, and Void Wraith at red are all really good, and all also have a place in Levia, so they are a little bit more flexible. So often I'm pretty inclined to pick these early in a pack, and then I might move in for something like a Seeds. Or I might have like a density of these Shadow Reds, and it's just clear that Chane is open. Like I'm just seeing like a high density of Chane cards, and maybe there's like some solid ones like Red Riftbind, Red Bounding Demagon. You know, some of those cards that like aren't quite good enough to move into, but are solid role players. If I already have Shadow Reds and I'm seeing those late, I'll pretty happily draft Chane.
And I guess a last way to get into Chain would probably be the generics. Obviously, poppers go in all the decks, and you'll start with those. But belittle minnowism would be like a very strong reason to be in Chain, as Chain is the one that gets to use the action point the best and the extra resources the best. If you start a draft with like, multiple red belittles and a blue minnowism or a red minnowism, it would probably be like a good, you have a strong reason to try and move into Chain if possible, and then cards such as maybe like Rifted Tournaments or Rifted Realities will go up in value if you are more situated towards the aggro plan.
I agree with all of that. So yeah, either you early pick a power card like Ironweave, Soul Reaping, or Seeds, or you start a little more flexible with Shadow Reds or generics, and then move in when you see Chain is open after that. I think are usually how we're getting into this deck. I think that if you are experienced with Chain, you can do quite a bit with a little, but I do think that it's not so straightforward, and I think most players will probably be most comfortable drafting Chain if it's like two of like if there's two chains, the chain decks are very very good, and I think they have enough raw power that like they're pretty approachable. When you start getting to like the three chain decks, like you start having to get pretty creative with what you're doing, and you can get there if you're practice and you have experience, but it's really hard. And even if you do have that experience, like you can just mess it up.
Yeah, you can lose to some Prism player that are playing multiple copies of Impenetrable Beliefs and Blinding Beams, and if they truly want to beat you and you're in a three chain pod, they will beat you. I guess that's a good segue to just ask how many chains do you think should be on a pod?
Hmm.
Like, are you happy if you're the two chain, or are you pretty happy if you're three chain?
I think it's like 2.5, where like two chain is actively really good. I think if it's two, like if the pod is evenly split two of each class, I think chain might be the strongest. Or maybe Prism, depending on the cards in the packs. But I think Chain has the potential to be the strongest. But I think when you get to three, it does get kind of dicey, and it depends a lot on your seat. Like if you have a good chain seat, sometimes you can still make it work, but really I'm hoping to be the two of chain.
Yeah, I think in Monarch, even like a better indication would be like how open Shadow is, because Livia also wants cards like Red Ghostly Touch, Red Void Wraiths, Red Howls, and if these cards are getting picked up by, let's say, if there's two Levia players and they're picking those up pretty highly, then you can get in a spot where your cards get slightly less powerful. And then even if you're so let's say there's like three chain to Levia, that's probably like a really, really bad sign.
Yeah, that's true. Whereas if there's three chain and one Levia, it's probably okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. And I also think that part of the power of Aether Ironweave and Soul Reaping, and even some of these other ones like Howl from Beyond in particular, is really premium. When you have these cards, your deck is so much better because just like the way that Chane works with the shackles, you always see all of the cards in your deck. And so having these certain key pieces is just really, really strong and greatly improves the power level of your deck. And I think that sometimes even if Chane, like if there are 3 chains and your chain deck is a little bit weaker, if you have a strong enough base, it's like you want a bunch of blood debt cards, but you almost don't care. There's a bunch of them that are kind of interchangeable and you don't really care. Like if you have some yellows, it's fine. If you have like a mix of like some of the less desirable ones, it's fine. Like they're all pretty good and you'll probably find enough. It's really a matter of like, do you have like, if you have like an Aether Iron Weave, a few seeds, a Howl from Beyond, a Ghostly Touch red, like your deck's probably pretty solid. Maybe one thing that we didn't touch on when we were outlining our decks is how much blood debt are you aiming for in your deck?
If I'm the aggro one, I'm basically wanting as many as possible. Riftbinds can always be played without having a non-attack action, so those cards are just like always pretty good. I don't know. I've actually never had a real count. I'll probably pick up as many Blood Debt cards as possible, and then that ends up being what, 16 Blood Debt, something like that, 17 Blood Debt.
I would say around that. I think for me, the upper limit is around 20. I think if you ever get over 20, like you're probably just playing too many. The blood debt cards are below rate, and you're probably just playing too many of them. I'd also be a little bit careful with some of the blood debt blues, especially the 2 cost blood debt blues. Having a few of them for your pitch deck can be cool, but if you're playing like 10 2 cost blood debt blues, like it gets really clunky, and then when you banish them early, like it's not great for you because it costs 2 resources and your action point and you're not really doing that much. So I think you do. That's one thing I'll say is like too many expensive blue blood debt cards is a little bit of a liability.
For the cards with Blood Debt, you really want them to be reds if possible. And the ones that we talked about in the combo endgame versions, those are the ones you want at blue. Like something like Blue Bounding Demigon can be pretty bad. Like even if you can turn it on and play it, it only attacks for 2. It doesn't cost a resource, but like using that for your using your action point for that is like it's pretty bad, right?
Yeah, it's not great. And I think even if you are the combo blood debt one, just like keep in mind you don't need that many of them. Like there's still like you're still limited to 1 turn and there's still only so many that you're going to banish and play. And you're kind of okay. Like in general, I'd say you don't want to be leaving your blood debt in there and letting it keep hitting you. But like if you're on your second last shackle, like you can definitely save a card or two. And that's not a disaster if they're key pieces. Like if there's like a Riftbind there or a Howl or like a Seeds that you know you need to save. It's not a disaster to save 1 or 2 cards so long as you are taking most of your opponent's cards at the same time.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. If you take too much from Blood Debt yourself, then you are put into a position where you're forced to block before your combo turn, and if that ever happens, then you're probably not being able to deploy enough pressure coming back. So just be careful on that.
Yeah, you can also run into the like I've seen some people when they're playing Chain for the first time not play blood debt cards early, and it can feel kind of good because you're like, oh, I have all these cards, but then if you start like hitting a bunch of shackles on top of it, like you like saved 3 blood debt and then you hit 3 blood debt, and then your next turn you hit like 2 more blood debt. Like you probably can't spend all those cards, and you might just die to your blood debt. So yeah, you want it to be more controlled, and at the end of the game, not just like this huge stack of blood debt cards that you can't really cast.
Yeah, that's pretty bad. That's pretty bad.
It's pretty grim. Like those are disaster games when they happen.
Anything else you want to talk about before we close out the episode?
I think that's about it. Chain is. I was gonna say Chain's the hardest deck to draft in the set. Is it just fair to say that Chain is probably the hardest draft deck we've seen?
Is it the hardest draft deck we've seen? I don't know. Kano, pretty difficult.
That's true. Kano pretty difficult. Azalea pretty difficult.
Yeah, even like someone like Icelander is quite tricky. Like it's not as hard as Chain, I don't think, but like she's probably pretty up there in like the trickiness of drafting her. There's
Anyways,
there's a lot of decks in this game that's like tricky to play, and once you like are comfortable enough to play with those heroes, then like your draft experience like greatly improves and your win percentage also greatly improves. I think in this format, Chane is the one where you're like, once you become comfortable with Chane and you can find those like open chain lanes, that's when you start to really improve your win percentage in this format.
Yeah, I think if you're looking to draft at a high level, like maybe you have nationals coming up, it really is in your interest to learn how to draft this deck because Chain is so powerful and can kind of like yeah, it's just a very very good deck. And some I know in some pods, players will steer away from Chain because they feel intimidated by him. And if you wind up in a pod full of people that are intimidated by Chain, that's just like, if you know what you're doing, it's like almost a free 3-0. So you really want to be able to capitalize on that when that is what your seat should be doing. And a lot of that is just practicing. Just try it out. You'll probably not have a great time the first draft or two, and that's normal. And just practice. And again, that we kind of mentioned you could build like a 34-ish card deck and just try playing through it, thinking about your pitch deck and see how that all comes together. Like maybe even without an opponent, just play out your hands, think about your pitch deck. And I think if you do that even like a few times, it will get notably easier.
Yeah, I agree with that. The one thing I don't agree with is at US sorry, not US. At Nationals, I'm probably going with the strategy of no pivot, no scout Prism. When we talk about the Prism episode, there's like a lot of small things I want to talk about. Yeah, you can have the worst, scrappiest, bauble heavy Prism deck, and you can 2-1.
Yeah, Prism is very, very good.
Yeah, I just want to be in a pod where there's like 7 Prism drafters. I can have the worst Prism deck. I'll be okay with it. I'll try and 2-1 with it.
Fair enough. Okay, good to wrap up.
Yeah, I think that's good.
As always, thanks for listening. If you have any questions or that you want answered or heroes that you're excited to learn about next, let us know down in the comments below, or you can reach out to us on social media. I'm at Yukili Bender on Twitter, and you can find Jay at UedaJ, also on Twitter. Alternatively, you can email us directly at onthebauble@gmail.com and send us your question and feedback there. Until next time, good luck drafting Monarch, and hope you open a library.